Hey guys, this is the series of videos where we are going through Angular unit testing guide and just checking out every topic and exploring it in some detail. So now we are at the part of testing components. We talked about testing methods in the component class versus testing against DOM manipulation and concluded that it's always good to assert against DOM rather than component methods, because that way you can cover more of the functionality and all that. So let's see what we have for different scenarios for testing components. In this video, I'm hoping to cover at least a few of them. So let's start with component binding. And what they mean by binding here is something that I already did during last video when demonstrating some tests. And binding is, let's see, let me open our component 1 component. And here you see how I declared CNT property, which is for counter. And that is a property. Now, if you go to the template of the same component, you see how I'm referring this property in the template. And that's what it's binding. I have a property in the template and I have the same property in the controller, and they are bound together so that the template is displaying whatever's the value currently in the property in the component. So that's really all to the binding. And what the topic that they are discussing here for component binding is pretty much boils down to testing. Let's see. I think the main point here is that you need to run DetectChanges for this binding to perform. Otherwise, during the test, if you don't allow DetectChanges statement to run, this value in the template just will not get parsed and bound to what's in the component controller, which is right here. Therefore, you just won't be able to assert against whatever you're asserting in unit tests. In our unit test example we have here is the DetectChanges run, and just to demonstrate their point, let me just make sure tests are running here. Okay, to demonstrate their point, I'm going to remove DetectChanges statement and let the test rerun. They should fail, demonstrating that the binding between the controller property and the template did not occur and the thing is failing. Alright, so that was the main point of component binding. Let me go back to the guide, and from here let's keep scrolling. Here they still in the topic of binding, they mention that if you don't want to run all the time that statement for detecting changes, you can import a helper thingy here from the Angular testing that will try to detect those changes automatically and run DetectChanges for you without you explicitly stating it here. However, if you scroll down a little bit further, here they have a disclaimer saying that you probably shouldn't do that and leave DetectChanges statements here in your tests explicitly so that you don't have to guess what changes you're trying to assert against are being detected automatically, what changes needs to be detected explicitly, because the automatic thingy does not detect everything. For example, if you have some kind of setup during your test, I think they are demonstrating it here. For example, during the test, they alter the component properties directly. Component properties. Yep, that is correct. And then, oops, navigated away by accident. I'm sorry. Let's get back here. DetectChanges, automatic. Yep, here they're setting the property on the component directly, and then if you do that, for whatever reason, if that's the part of your test, you must run DetectChanges even though you have the automatic setup. So they just say just forget about it and run detect changes all the time. And that is all. I agree with that. It is always to be better explicit rather than rely on some magic on you don't know when it works and when it doesn't. All right, moving on. Next part is about inputting elements in the form elements. So here they're saying that you need to run this dispatch event statement whenever you have a input field in your component and you're testing the user inputting data in that field and whatever happens to it. So we can explore this part a little bit, I think. And what this will boil down to is that you will need to run that dispatch event statement on your input field, and only then you can assert against the expected behavior. So to demonstrate that, let me go to the template here and alter that a little bit. All right, how would we alter that is, let's see. So we have this counter, right? We need to have the input field. So let's replace this button here. Yeah, let's just remove it. And instead of that, let's have the input field. And what it will do is, like any input field, it will accept a value from the user. And then that value, let's say we expect the user to enter a number. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make a sum. We'll do some math. We'll double that number. All right. Yeah, that's pretty simple. Now, before you have a reference to the number that user is inputting here, well, actually, that's what you need. You need a reference to the number the user is inputting here. And then you can double that doing some math. So, for example, if this will reference the value, let's say input value, let's just call it like this, it'll be a property, and here we will double using some math here, we will double it, and that's what the template will show here in this div. But how you get that reference is you will use ngModel statement on an input. So we'll use banana in a box, so box comes first, then it's a banana, then it's ngModel. All right, and that's how we can bind the value of input to the component property, which here we use it as input value. We name it as input value. All right, and things are getting highlighted. Let's see why they are highlighted. Here, tslint says that it doesn't recognize ngModel. And that is expected because I think what you need to do is to import Angular forms into your application before ngModel can work. But because I don't know exactly if that's correct, I'm just going to copy this error message right here and just do like any other 90% of code development I do. You just Google the error message, or not code development, but rather debugging errors. That's how you can solve any issue you ever encounter in web application development. You just stick that in Google and you go to the first Stack Overview message answer. All right, so the answer says that, let's see, is that the best answer? Yeah, you should always check that the answer has most upvotes, the one you're looking at. And here it mentions forms module explicitly. I'm not going to even read anything here. I'm just going to copy this and go to app module of my application and stick that import down here and then add it in the imports list here. Okay, I think that should be sufficient. Let me make a little change here to rerun the checks. Okay, now things are highlighted differently. Now this thing is highlighted and I know exactly why, because I used that component property, but I never declared it in the component controller. So let me declare it. I'll use public keyword for it. I'll say that. Input value. I'm not going to set any default values to it. I don't think that's necessary. Now if I make some changes here just to retrigger the lint test, now it shows that nothing is highlighted. And I think that should just work. Let's try to load the app in the browser. I think I need to start serving it actually here. We see that some existing tests fail here, and let me disable those because I deleted a bunch of stuff from this template and now older tests are not working. So I'm just going to exclude it here from the test run. All right. And then let's see, the app is served. Here I can open it in localhost and move it down here. And then here's our field, and I'll put a number, I'll say 3, and it shows 6. I put 6, it shows 16. I'm sorry, I put 8, it shows 16. Look at that, it works right away. By the way, that's what you see in all the Angular introduction tutorials, where they have this input field and they have that ng model stuff, and they put a number and it doubles it and it does it like right away. That's your Angular primer. Okay, now we have a functionality that uses an input field, right? And now what we need to do is we need to test the behavior of the component and say that in this div, it shows the actual doubled value when user inputs whatever is the number here. All right, so how would we go about testing that? Let's go into the test. Let's use this as a blueprint as usual. Let's remove the X designation and then here change test description to say should show a doubled value, whatever. Now, if we look back into the guide here, they say whenever you input the value into the input field, you need to run this dispatch event, but you also need to input that value somehow, and you can see the example here. This in fact simulates the way of the user is adding something into the field. So you see me typing stuff here and running this statement where he's saying on the input field that value you're setting that. That's what actually happens behind the scenes in the browser. When it processes your keystrokes here, it just sets the value into that element. And so in the test, we're sort of simulating that, but on a low level. And that's how we do that. So let's do this in the test. First thing, we need to grab the reference to the input field like that. And I believe that's already in it. And what we need to do, actually, I'm not going to set that directly. I'm going to save the reference to the variable. I'll say input. All right. I'll remove these outdated comments from here. So we got our input. Now we can set the value to it, saying, let's say 5. Okay. And then what the guide says, you should run that dispatch event on that input. So it'll be input dispatch event input. It doesn't recognize new, actually fix this dot here, and here it doesn't recognize new event thingy. And what is it? Is it mentioning anywhere? I would imagine it was some native JavaScript event, and you know what, let me just change it to native. It doesn't work. Okay, let's see the highlight, what it says. Cannot find new event. I remember I was dealing with something like this, and they didn't need to use anything fancy. Why it doesn't recognize that? And to fix that, I'm going to Google something again. I'll say Angular testing input value. All right, that should find me something interesting, something working. In this example, I can see, oh, there you go. Look at this. In this example, they're just using straight up. Oh, is that a typo? Because what it should be, it's simple space, because new is a keyword. It's not some kind of new event thingy like I copy it. So I think they have a typo here. Let me double check that. So I'll go back from where I copied it. Dispatch new event. Yeah, it's absolutely a typo. I should file a pull request or something, but I'll let somebody else do it. All right, now we're doing what they say you're supposed to be doing, dispatching event on the input and then running detect changes. Let's fix our assertion that in the div, in the content of the div, we expect, what is it? If we double 5, that should be 10, right? So if we just fix this, in theory, our test should pass. In theory, because it's rarely passing from the first time. You usually realize that you forgot something stupid. And that's probably the case. It's not passing right now. It says cannot read property of native element of undefined. Let's see exact line. It's in our test, and it's line 35 right here. So let's see 35 native element. So it doesn't recognize the fixture. How come it doesn't know what fixture is? That doesn't make sense. Fixture is defined and processed here. Maybe I need to run detect changes before that as well. So let's just do some monkeying around here to see if I can make the test pass. Now it says cannot bind ng model. Oh, there you go. That got us one step further. Now it says that I can't process ng model, and to fix that, I know from my experience that we need to do the same thing we did in app module. We need to specify whatever dependencies our app has, or specifically our component has, on other modules and import them just like we did in our application when it's loaded in the browser. Now this is loaded during Karma run, so it doesn't have the same stuff as when the app is loaded in production in browser. So here we need to import the same stuff as we did in the app there. It should say imports like that. Okay, is this sufficient? Let's see. A test rerun. All right, everything's passing. Look at this. So we followed the guide in terms of calling that dispatch event on the input, and it actually worked. That's how you test input fields in your components, if obviously they fixed their typos. All right, I think that was a good demonstration of this. Let's see what's coming down the pipe for more scenarios. So that took a while to go over component binding and detect changes and dispatch events. But let's see what's next. Next thing is about external files. And I'm not sure that's why it's even a thing. It is about testing your component when you're separating your template and styles in separate files. But like, you should always do that anyway. Why do you need specific tests around that? So, and here they are moving on to the next topic when you are testing your component with a dependency. It's good that we have a service already generated, so we can simulate that to be our dependency for our component, and then we can go about figuring out or following their examples on how we can mock that service and do whatever testing in the component based on that. So that'll be for the next time.